Ladies and gentlemen, you who have gathered not only to hear, but to feel, to perceive with the inner organ of the soul, I must ask you to leave behind the assumptions of the waking world. For we are about to enter a landscape ruled not by logic, but by symbol, by image, by the language of the unconscious. For tonight, we must speak of a phenomenon so potent and so deeply embedded in the hidden layers of the psyche that it plays out in the quiet tragedies of many lives, why the empath is drawn to the narcissist and why that bond, though invisible to the world, often feels unbreakable. Let us begin not with the personality, but with the deeper principle that governs all psychic life. The unconscious seeks wholeness. And in that seeking, it draws to itself not merely what pleases or completes it, but more often what has been denied, disowned, exiled to the shadows. The empath, by nature, is attuned to suffering, not merely their own, but the unspoken ache of others. This is not sentimentality. This is not merely kindness. It is a psychic function. It is an archetypal inheritance. The empath carries the legacy of the wounded healer, the Chiron figure, the medicine man or woman whose own pain gives them access to the ailments of the world. And what of the narcissist? The narcissist, too, is a wound wrapped in armor. But unlike the empath, who bleeds outward, the narcissist bleeds inward. The pain is hidden behind the mirrored wall of persona, the mask of inflated selfhood that conceals a gaping void beneath. They do not feel others because they cannot fully feel themselves. They do not reflect. They project what they cannot own. They cast out what they cannot admit. They demand that others carry. You see now, the two are mirrors, not of each other's wholeness, but of each other's void. The empath feels too much, the narcissist feels too little, but underneath both lies the same archetypal imbalance, a distortion of boundaries, a confusion between the self and the other, a desperate attempt to heal a primal wound by reaching into or being consumed by another. This is not love. This is possession masquerading as intimacy. The empath senses unconsciously the child hiding behind the narcissist's grandeur. They sense the starvation of soul beneath the vanity. And they reach, oh, how they reach, not with their arms, but with their energy, their essence, their very being. And the narcissist, like a moth to the psychic flame, draws near, not to reciprocate, but to feed. Why then does the empath not flee? Why does the one who feels everything not feel the danger? But they do. It is not that they do not know. It is that they recognize the wound is familiar. The pattern is ancestral. The unconscious speaks in echoes, not in reasons. The empath is not merely drawn to the narcissist. They are summoned, and the call is not of romance, but of karma, of shadow, of soul. You must understand that such attractions are not accidents. They are psychic inevitabilities. When the inner opposites have not been reconciled, the empath, in denying their own aggression, their own hunger, their own right to assert, creates a vacuum that is filled by the narcissist's domination. The narcissist, in denying their vulnerability, Their need to be seen and held finds in the empath a womb of endless empathy that never asks for anything in return. Each is the other's lost part, not in a wholesome union, but in a mutual distortion, a dance of enmeshment. There is a moment, often early in such relationships, when the empath feels seen not because the narcissist sees them truly, but because the narcissist reflects back the empath's ideal self. This is the seduction, not of the body, but of the psyche. The narcissist intuits the archetypal longing within the empath and mirrors it not from a place of authenticity, but from necessity. It is a mask designed to gain entry, and once within, the game changes. The mirror no longer flatters, it distorts. The empath begins to lose shape, to lose voice. They feel hollow, confused, ashamed of their own needs, addicted to a connection that no longer soothes but wounds. And yet they stay. Why? Because the child within them believes desperately that love can fix, that goodness can change, that sacrifice can awaken conscience. But what the empath must come to understand is this: you cannot bleed enough to heal someone who will not bandage their own wounds. You cannot shine enough to bring light to someone who has exiled their own soul. And yet, the narcissist is not evil. They are not monsters. They are people in pain. But their pain has calcified into a structure of defense, so rigid, so intricate, that it feeds not on healing, but on control. The narcissist is not merely unwilling to change. They are terrified of it. For change would mean facing the very void they have spent their lives denying. And so the empath becomes the sacrificial lamb at the altar of that denial. There is a peculiar alchemy in this dynamic. The more the empath gives, the less they are valued, the more they endure, the more they are tested. It is not love, but a crucifixion, and yet the crucifixion is part of the story, for in the descent lies the potential for awakening. Not the awakening of the narcissist. No, that is not the empath's task. The true awakening is the empath's own return to themselves. But first, the descent. This descent is symbolic, archetypal. It is the journey into the underworld, the realm of Hades, of the unconscious, of shadow. The empath, having invested their identity in the role of savior, must confront the dark truth. They have abandoned themselves. They have given what they were not first willing to give to themselves: compassion, patience, boundaries, protection. And now the soul revolts. The psyche, like nature, abhors imbalance. When too much is given outwardly, the inner world begins to collapse. Anxiety, depression, confusion, these are not merely symptoms. They are messengers. The soul does not scream in language. It whispers in symbols, in symptoms, in synchronicities. The empath's exhaustion is not a flaw. It is a flag, a red one. We cannot speak of healing without first speaking of guilt. For the empath, the severing of such a bond feels like betrayal. But what is being betrayed is not the narcissist. It is the archetype, the inner savior, the identity wrapped in self-erasure. To walk away is not to harm, it is to reclaim. To say no is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of resurrection. And herein lies the deeper lesson. The narcissist is not the enemy. They are the mirror. They reflect not who the empath is, but who the empath is not yet willing to be sovereign, assertive, self-honoring. And the pain of this reflection is the price of awakening. The relationship is the crucible. The alchemy is in the burning. Do you begin to see not all who hurt you are your enemies, and not all who flatter you are your friends? The unconscious brings to us the partners who will provoke our evolution, not through comfort, but through confrontation, through the surfacing of the buried, the return of the denied. The narcissist is not the lesson. The lesson is the self, and the self, once recovered, is immune to manipulation. But first, and this is the most difficult task of all, the empaths must forgive themselves, forgive the blindness, the naivety, the desperation, forgive the years spent shrinking, contorting, bending into shapes that were never true. For it is only through this mercy that they can reclaim the power they projected outward. Only through this mercy can they cease to absorb what was never theirs. For the soul does not want a savior. The soul wants to be seen, and that seeing, that sacred recognition, must begin within. And when the empaths, in all their yearning to be loved for who they are, to be seen, meets the narcissist who holds a mirror of grandiosity to the world, there is a strange magnetic pull, not love, not even attraction in the romantic sense, but recognition. The empath recognizes something they once repressed, while the narcissist senses something they never possessed, but deeply need authenticity. The tragedy is this: the empath gives their soul in pieces, believing that by loving more purely, more sacrificially, they will heal the narcissist. But healing does not occur through sacrifice alone. Healing occurs when light is cast into the shadow, and the narcissist resists the light, not because they are evil, but because they are terrified. The persona they have crafted is their fortress. To question it is to risk annihilation. And so, in the tragic theater of the psyche, the empath becomes the unwitting supply of what the narcissist cannot generate from within: validation, emotional energy, and sometimes even meaning. But you must hear this carefully. This dynamic is not punishment. It is an initiation. You see, the empath is not merely a victim. The empath is a soul in search of wholeness. And the narcissist, whether by fate or by the mechanics of the psyche, is the catalyst for that transformation. The narcissist is a teacher. In the most painful of classrooms, they teach the empath where their boundaries were never drawn. They teach the empath how their light has been externalized, how their value has been dependent on being good for others, instead of being true to themselves. And so the dance continues until one awakens. That awakening often comes through suffering a collapse, a breakdown, a night so dark, the stars themselves vanish. But in this dark night of the soul, the empath touches something divine, not the divine of dogma or doctrine, but the divine of self, the inner God image, the numinous center. And it whispers, you were never here to heal the narcissist. You were here to reclaim your own soul. This revelation strikes like lightning. The empath begins to realize they were playing an archetypal role: the wounded healer, the martyr, the savior. And that role, though noble in story, is often toxic in life when it comes at the expense of the self. At this stage, the work turns inward. The empath who once felt superior in their emotional depth now faces their own shadow, the part of them that was addicted to being needed, the part that feared abandonment so much they would rather bleed quietly than speak up, the part that called manipulation love in this confrontation with the shadow. The true self is born, and what is the self? Not a perfected ego, not an inflated persona, but the totality of the psyche, integrated. It is the center that holds the opposites in tension, the light and dark, the masculine and feminine, the rational and the mystical. The empath, having emerged from the fire of emotional fusion, begins to establish sovereignty. Not walls, not bitterness, but clarity. Now, the empath no longer attracts narcissists out of unconscious programming. They may still meet them, for the world is full of archetypes in human form, but they do not merge with them. They see them, they bless them, and they walk away. Let me offer you this dream, which once appeared to a woman deeply entangled in such a relationship. In the dream, she stood in a cathedral, alone, weeping. A mirror hovered before her. She looked into it, expecting to see her face, but the mirror remained blank. Only when she stopped crying and reached out with her own hand did the reflection form not her image, but a glowing flame in the center. She awoke trembling. This dream is symbolic of the empath's journey. The cathedral is the soul sacred. But abandonnée, the mirror is the narcissist, a blank surface reflecting nothing real. But the flame is the self, only revealed when one ceases to mourn what was never truly given and begins to touch their own inner fire. This is the alchemical process, the conjunctio, the sacred marriage within. The empath no longer seeks rescue or recognition. They embody their own authority. They cease to be prey, for they no longer fear their own depth. They have walked through the underworld, and unlike Persephone, they do not return in chains. But as queen, the healing, you see, is not about changing the other. It is about waking from the illusion that you were ever incomplete. And so I say this to you who feel trapped in this emotional entanglement. The reason you cannot escape is because part of you does not want to, not out of weakness, but out of an unconscious belief that if you love well enough, the wound will finally close. But the wound will never close through repetition of the pattern. It will only close through individuation. You must individuate. You must take back the projections you cast. You must mourn the fantasy. And you must meet yourself in the silence beneath all need. Then, only then, will the magnet break. And in that breaking, a birth. And in that breaking, a birth. Not the birth of another role, or yet another identity for the world to admire, but the birth of essence, of you, the soul, stripped of costume, standing barefoot on the inner threshold, no longer performing the drama of salvation, but resting in the gravity of truth. When the empath awakens, They no longer identify with their pain as proof of their goodness. They see that their suffering was not virtue, it was unconsciousness. They recognize that their love, once given to others as currency for belonging, must first be given inward as recognition. This is the moment when the mirror shatters. The narcissist can no longer hold the image of the empath's self-worth hostage. The empath sees clearly they were never in love with the narcissist. They were in love with the hope of being finally enough. And in that realization, something radical occurs. Forgiveness, not as a moral act, but as liberation. The empath does not forgive to absolve the narcissist. They forgive to free themselves from the endless loop of seeking healing in the same wound that caused the pain. This is the crucifixion of the old self, the death of the need to be needed. The ego cries out, for it believes it is dying. But the self whispers, this is not death, this is resurrection. In many dreams, this transition appears as the image of crossing water, a boat on a dark river. The narcissist waves from the shore, sometimes begging, sometimes mocking. The empath rows forward, alone, no longer trying to rescue, no longer shouting explanations, just rowing towards the unknown, toward soul. For the intuitive few, this passage is sacred. It is a rite that cannot be skipped, only endured. And the danger lies not in the narcissist, but in the temptation to go back, to return to the dance, to believe, one more time, that you can save them. That if you are just more understanding, more patient, more silent, it will change. No, the intuitive soul must learn this painful law of individuation. Not all people can come with you. Some are not meant to be saved by you, they are meant to wake you and then disappear. In the final stages of this journey, the empath, now becoming the individuated self, begins to create from within. Art flows, silence heals. The body, once tight from vigilance, begins to trust the nervous system again. Laughter returns, not manic, not performative, but whole. And the soul, long buried beneath the need to be loved, recess, not triumphant, not loud, but sovereign. This sovereignty is not dominance, it is presence. It does not need applause. It does not seek validation. It simply is, and it draws to itself not admirers, but mirrors other sovereign souls who reflect not need, but essence. If you're hearing this now and something stirs in you, perhaps it is your own mirror cracking. Perhaps it is your own soul whispering, the pattern must end with you. Perhaps you are not here to be loved by everyone. Perhaps you are here to see clearly, and what you see may break you, but what breaks you may just set you free. Let me end with this vision. A woman walks through a field at twilight. She has left the burning castle of her old identity behind. She carries nothing. Her hands are empty, but in her eyes, fire, in her step, rhythm. She does not look back. She does not explain. She does not hope. She simply walks, and this, dear listener, is the most sacred form of love. There is not the love that binds, but the love that releases, The love that no longer says, I will lose myself to keep you, but instead whispers, I found myself and I must go. This is the call of the self. Answer it. And if you do answer the call, know this, it will not make you popular. It will not make you universally understood. In fact, it may isolate you for a time, because to individuate is to walk a path not yet carved by others. It is to become the symbol you once sought in someone else, the teacher you once needed, the partner you once chased, the savior you once played. But oh, what glory awaits the one who dares to stop repeating the pattern. For when you finally stand in your own soul, unhooked from the projection, undevoured by the complex, you begin to magnetize the true, not from desperation, but from vibration, not from fear, but from frequency. It is at this point that the narcissist may return, but not as a partner, no, as a test, the final ghost at the threshold. And they will come cloaked in new language, perhaps even spiritual rhetoric, mirroring your growth. But look deeper. Watch the energy, not the words. Trust your body, not the script. The body always knows. And if you stay rooted, if you no longer abandon yourself at the first sign of disapproval, if you no longer shapeshift to keep the peace, then the narcissist will dissolve like smoke. Not because you defeated them, but because you no longer need them. The dynamic dies when the wound that attracted it is healed. This is the unspoken truth that psychology so often avoids. The soul chooses its mirrors for healing. The narcissist was not your punishment. They were your teacher. Not in the romanticized sense of everything happens for a reason, but in the deeper archetypal truth, every soul encounter is an echo of your miss. And your miss will repeat until it is fulfilled, or until you awaken. So let this be the awakening. Let this be the end of the cycle. Let this be the sermon that breaks the trance. You were not made to be a vessel for someone else's unintegrated shadow. You were not born to keep your light dim, so another would not feel threatened. You were not summoned to this world to play small so someone else could feel big. You are the storm. You are the stillness after. You are the archetype of the healed one, the one who passed through the underworld and came out intact. The one who made contact with the abyss and brought back language for the rest of us. And that language is freedom. True freedom is not escape. It is presence. It is saying, I will no longer abandon myself. Even if it means being misunderstood, I will no longer betray my soul for approval. I will no longer confuse someone's hunger for love. I will love from fullness. I will love from the root. Now listen closely for the final image. Imagine the moon hanging low over a quiet lake. The surface is still reflective. A figure sits at the water's edge, alone but not lonely. She does not cry, she does not speak. She simply is. Around here, the ghosts of old roles vanish. The ache of being too much or not enough melts away. What remains is essence, silence. Sofa Ainkti. She places her hand on her heart, not to comfort, but to remember, this is who I was before they told me what I needed to be. And with that touch, the cycle ends. Empaths do not need to escape narcissists. They need to awaken. And when they do, the spell breaks. The archetype dissolves and the self steps forth. So I leave you not with answers, but with a question that only the depths of your own soul can respond to. Will you return to the performance, or will you finally walk free? The choice is yours, and your freedom begins when you stop trying to be loved and begin the sacred act of loving yourself. This is individuation. This is the end of the story, or perhaps the beginning